Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andrew Weiss from the Carnegie Endowment, and it's a real privilege to have Mikhail Zygar here today to talk about his new book, The Empire Must Die. Mikhail is one of Russia's most prominent journalists, and for the past year or so, year and a half, has been leading Project 1917, which I hope a lot of you have been tuning into day in, day out, which has been this great multimedia chronicle of the road to the revolution through the eyes of participants and other major cultural figures. And it's, I think, I could be wrong, someone has ripped you off, because I saw RT now had a similar thing on its site in the last couple days. And is this trolling? Is this, I don't know what it was, but it was, or it was flat, it was a compliment, but it was.
Yeah, they were trying to start something like that in February, then they stopped, and then they, you shouldn't be nervous about RT mimicking. It's not good that they're using budget money to steal somebody's ideas, but you cannot do anything about that.
So by way of background, Mikhail came to his role as a historian or as a citizen historian through journalism, and until 2015 was the editor-in-chief of TV Dost, which is one of Russia's most important independent news sources, and it was, in its heyday under Mikhail, a really important convening point for discussions about political developments in Russia, and had played an important role in the events in 2011, 2012. Before that, he had been a journalist at Kommersant and a war correspondent. So he, in his first book, which I think we'll come to in the second part of the conversation, All the Kremlin's Men, which looks at sort of the inner circle around Putin, has been a really, I think, a unique voice in talking about contemporary Russia, how the state is constructed and what's real and what's not real. So why don't we talk about the book a little bit, and then we'll get to these other elephants in the room about sort of what's going on right now. And this conversation's on the record, and I'll encourage folks to jump in and pose questions as we come to the final portion of this conversation. Can you talk a little bit about why, and by the way, books are on sale outside, I should have said this earlier, at a discount, so there's a steep discount if you want to buy either of Mikhail's two books, Emperor Must Die or All the Kremlin's Men, and they'll be on sale in the hallway after the event at, I believe, I think a 20% markdown. But coming back to the format that you chose, which was this online, very personalized tale of the revolution, what made you want to tell the revolution through the eyes of participants as opposed to the broader historical lens that most people have brought, which looks at the collapse of Tsarism, the impact of the war, the impact of social movements in Russia? What made you do this approach? Because the book is clearly based on a lot of those first-person accounts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for coming in. Thank you for the question. Actually, it all started with the book. And it all started with probably the previous book, because when I was living Dost, TV and when I, at the same time, published the previous book, All the Kremlin's Men, I felt that I want to escape the news, that I can no longer watch all those political events that I had to cover. I could not watch 6 hours long direct lines of President Putin, or all kind of that important events that any news website had to follow, and even compete with other media in covering, because I considered most of those political agenda that we had to follow. We would call that fake news. We call that fictional agenda. Okay, and even if I considered something to be not important, and I could not avoid paying attention to that events, because all the competitors were covering about that, and all the audience wanted to click on news about Putin, or about a girl who asked Putin for a new Cinderella's dress, or something else. So I deliberately decided to immigrate 100 years ago to address some historical traumas of Russian society, and probably to address stereotypes that are formed by our history and by the perception of our history. Because it seemed to me that our country doesn't have any history of the society. We don't have history of Russian people. We've got history of Russian state that is focused on the history of rulers. All the classical historians who wrote the great books about Russian history, most of the books were called History of Russian State, since Karamzin till Boris Akunin, I'm sorry, and most of them are focused on the rulers and what's happening inside the head of the emperor or secretary general or president, and it looks like as there is no other. There are no other people who can influence, who can change anything in the country. And I really think that perception of Russian history forms, in a way, a stereotype that still exists, that it's not up to people to change it. We don't, unlike many European countries or unlike America, there are no great personalities in our history, like Martin Luther King or Joan of Arc, Martin Luther, Gutenberg, and that was part of my mission to create the different angle of Russian history, to try to start creating history of Russian society. And as I'm not a historian, I deliberately chose very journalist way to explore Russian history, starting from 1917 and a couple of decades before that, to try to explain what was Russian society thinking that time. That was probably the most important period of time for Russian civil society. It was booming. It was very developed. It was very important. It was very strong. Russia as a country was very culturally influential that time. Russia probably was one of the most popular countries in the world, thanks to Russian literature, Russian theater, Russian ballet, art. It was real, and domestically it was really important. Big business was trying to shape its own perception of the politics. So I started my attempt to learn how those people wanted to change the country, what they were thinking of the perspectives, what they were dreaming of, what they were afraid of. If I was writing about the current affairs, I would have interviewed all of them. There was no possibility to interview them directly. That's why I started with trying to read all the possible diaries, letters, memoirs, and I found them terrific. First, that country that existed 100 years ago or slightly more is completely different from the country we know now. But it's like a Roman Empire and today's Italy. It's very distant. But at the same time, we have all those sources. They are written in the modern Russian language. They are very easy to understand for today's Russian audience. And it struck me with the idea that I need to create a mechanism that would allow today's Russian audience to get quick access to all those perfect primary sources, to all those documents. So it could face not the traditional dogmatic version of one-man show, Nicholas II, then Kerensky, then Lenin, but to face the Russian society, how it looked like 100 years ago. So we've done a huge job to collect and digitize a lot of diaries, letters, memoirs from now more than 2,000 main characters, and we created some kind of what if Facebook existed 100 years ago. So it looks like a documentary Facebook, and every day it's possible to read what those people who were living 100 years ago were thinking of this day exactly. The project is going to be over like in 3 months, in January of 2018, and it's going to remain a eternal virtual museum of 1917. So the project came out of the book that is not only about 1 year, but much more about two decades, but shares the same ambition to give another vision of Russian society that was active, that wanted to influence and was not apathetic and did not think that Russia's destiny is to be an empire, and Russia's destiny is to be a dictatorship.
Can you talk a little bit about that in more detail? Because part of what, when I looked at the book, you seemed very clearly to talk about is the influence of Black Sunday on an entire generation of members of the Russian intelligentsia and the cultural elite and a political class that basically saw that as the country has to change. And then obviously the country after 1917 goes in a horribly different direction at the hands of a small group that basically isn't taken seriously as they come on the stage. I'm just sort of curious, as you look at people's diaries, both as they anticipated the idea that Russia had to change and then they saw it kind of go off track. Can you talk a little bit about what you feel either people didn't see coming or didn't understand about Russia and the opportunities that small groups of very determined people like the Bolsheviks could have on the ultimate direction of Russian history and global history as well?
Okay, let me focus just on one little period. What was happening after February Revolution 1917? That's probably the least well-known period of Russian history, the most neglected period of Russian history, although it's really important. It's always called February Revolution, although according to the news style it happened in March, and actually it wasn't revolution. It was just a miracle when Russian state ruined itself. There was no interference. There was no plot. There was no uprising. Almost it just that was a catastrophe of the state apparatus that was so corrupted and bureaucratic and outdated, so it could not exist. And at the same time, that was a huge wave of euphoria for civil society. The first provisional government was a very important step for the country, because that was a real chance to fulfill a lot of ideas that have been discussed by the society throughout the decades. The first provisional government was influenced by ideas of Tolstoy. Actually, they were the first prime minister of the first government of the first Russian Republic, Georgy Lvov. I like a comparison between Lvov and George Washington, as he could have become Russian George Washington. He was a close friend of Tolstoy, and he was influenced by Tolstoy a lot. They managed to become the most progressive government in the world. They under the first provisional government, Russia was the first country in the world to abolish death penalty. Russia was the first country in Europe and the third in the world after Australia and New Zealand to give women voting rights. They were actually there was a national consensus that that revolution was wanted by everyone, and throughout the first months of those revolution, the general mood was happiness. There was only one man who was obviously criticizing what has happened, and who was obviously demanding for the regime change. He has come. He came to Russia from Switzerland in April. His name was Vladimir Ulyanov, and he was also writing under name N or Nikolai Lenin. And he was alone. He was not supported even by his own party, because when he turned up asking for a new revolution, no one understood why, because everyone was really happy with that new Russian democracy. Only Lenin and the only other supporter of that idea was his friend Alexander Kollontai, the future first female minister in the world. But he became the center of that first marginalized group of people who were very unhappy with or were not successful under the new regime. The economic situation still was very bad. A lot of problems were not being solved for a long time. There was a war without any clear perspective of a victory, of an end, and it was rather long but very quick process of different people, especially marginalized, especially poor people who wanted, who were absolutely sure that the happiness is coming, but they did not become happy, and they concentrated around Lenin. But nevertheless, I'm absolutely sure that period between February and October is still very important. That's also very important result of everything that was happening before February Revolution, and that's also very important part of Russian history and like history of Russian society, because that was the shape of the new Russia wanted by a lot of people, actually no one was prepared for that extreme form that was chosen by Lenin. No one was afraid that Bolsheviks government would last long. Most of people were absolutely sure that okay, Bolsheviks are for 2 weeks, not longer, because they are marginalized. They don't have any plans what to do with the country. Everyone was pretty sure that the same Russian democracy was going to endure.
So let's talk about the reception. It's been an unusual centenary year because this incredibly important event has not been front and center, at least in Russia. There's been fairly subdued discussion. But I'm sort of curious about, in your circle, in the sort of Moscow universe that you live in, when you started putting this material out, what were the reactions from your friends and your colleagues? I've heard anecdotally these stories, but they're kind of interesting reactions, I assume, from people. And can you share a little of how people today in Moscow, who you consider very well, informed and sophisticated, have sort of looked at this material? Like, what were they saying to you in response as the project unfolded?
We started preparing that project like in a year before, and by the beginning of 2017, most of the content was ready, and while having negotiations with different institutions like State Archive or Tretyakov Gallery or State Library, that used to be Lenin's library, or some other institutions, I was really surprised with the fact that they didn't know what to do. They thought that they should do something about the anniversary, but they had no instructions from the government. So they asked us to help them to organize something, exhibition, lecture, some web platform. So and we, like a private company actually, we happened to become responsible for a lot of events throughout the year, and that was the first surprise for me, that I thought that there was going to be much noise about that. Okay, and I'll come back to that later. Speaking about the reception, actually, it was just as I expected. We were almost ignored by the mainstream media. During the first 2 months of the existence of our project, CNN reported 2 times. We had an article about our project in New York Times, in The Guardian, Economist, Wall Street Journal, The Times. So a lot of well-known English language media, American, British, but almost nothing in Russia. Just the fact that we created the biggest ever database of all the diaries and all the texts about 1917 was not impressive for Russian media, and I was prepared for that. Just that's normal for the situation we live in. I understand that probably that's because of me. That's because my background as ex-editor-in-chief of Dost means that I cannot be mentioned on most of the media. At the same time, we were really impressed by the reception of the audience. Like, we had up to 1 million unique visitors on our website monthly. We had our application and up to 100,000 uploads of the application. And speaking about the total reach of the project in social media, that's more than 3 million. And that means, and if we're speaking about the audience, on the website we've got much like people elder than 25, 40 years old. But on the social media, they are much younger. They're like 15, 25. That means that millions of Russian teenagers started reading about Russian history, started not thinking that is something boring, not thinking that they are reading about history, because they were just reading stories of interesting people, of the celebrity. They consider them celebrities. We've got tens of thousands followers for accounts of Marina Tsvetaeva or Vladimir Mayakovsky, and they consider them to be pop stars, rap stars, okay, and we saw that the last part of our the special project made for the anniversary of the October Revolution was even more popular than anything that we've done before. So it looks like that format of storytelling we've invented, and we wanted to look exciting for young people. It's working, and finally we seem to in a way to reach our objective. if I don't know if I have to continue with what's happening with
Well,
the anniversary.
So let's come to that. So this split you're describing of sort of exciting things happening, young people being engaged, there being a very vibrant online social media universe, and at the top almost either silence or very limited signaling about how you're supposed to think about this, sort of a vacuum. Can you talk about why this anniversary, which everyone has seen coming for several years now, wasn't utilized by the regime more effectively, and why they basically kind of wanted to treat it as if it didn't happen? Is it because there's too many uncomfortable parallels between stagnation and the kind of czarist atmosphere that surrounds Mr. Putin, or is it just that things have been mismanaged and they didn't really have their, it wasn't the Sochi Olympics, it wasn't the World Cup where, это наш, like this is something that people really can get excited about.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just sort of the bureaucratics of like why this wasn't handled better?
I know that was a decision, and that decision was made by President Putin himself. And December or maybe November 2016, there was a meeting in Kremlin, and he said, according to my sources, that all the commemoration should be on the expert level. So it's up to historians to discuss the anniversary, not the general public. Actually, it's rather logic, because in today's Russia, history is very important. History is used as a tool of propaganda every day. History is the part of the new Russian ideology, and the new Russian ideology is that Russia is an empire, and that's an achievement of the Putin's third term. He has made Russia empire again, and a lot of people are happy with that. A lot of people are proud about that. In that sense, 1917 is very uncomfortable period to be proud of. They cannot compare themselves. I mean, the authorities cannot compare themselves with anyone. That's the period when Russia used to be an empire, but the bureaucratic state collapsed because it was ineffective, and the civil society was strong enough to start creating some democratic institutions. For Putin, who's going to be re-elected next year, that's not the tool he can use. The empire he's reconstructing is like an imaginary empire that is a mixture of different parts of Soviet Union, of Russian Empire before the revolution. It's not a continuation of something concrete, but that's probably one of the reasons why he always criticizes Lenin, and he never stops denouncing Lenin as the man who destroyed Russia. But there is much more sophisticated attitude to Stalin. Being interviewed by Oliver Stone, Putin said that any attempt to demonize Stalin is an attack against Russia. That was like the first time ever when Putin vocally started protecting Stalin from being demonized. But that's important, because Stalin is obviously viewed as a person who has rebuilt Russia, who has restored the empire. So probably that's the major explanation of that not widely commemorated anniversary, I've never saw any sign of, as many journalists usually say, Russian authorities are afraid of. They are not afraid. I've never saw any sign of fear. They are very self-confident. They are not afraid. Just they don't need it.
So take your historian hat off and put your political analyst hat off and describe for all of us what it means now for Vladimir Putin to be a presidential candidate in an atmosphere where he has no opponents, there is no alternative to the system that he's created, and where this message about imperialism, conservative values, triumph over the West, and all this, kind of fake history about the origins of the Russian state lying in Crimea. I mean, everything is possible, right? Because
Because Russian history is unpredictable.
Right,
Yeah.
it's clay,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they can make it into whatever they want. But I'm just sort of curious, will that set of themes further alienate the people who were at the heart of 2011, 2012, and the great success of Dosh? Or are they now, have they lost their ability to see what's real and what's not real? And will they think, yeah, Russia's great, and the West is, our enemy? Like, is that a unifying message across Russian society? Or
Complicated question. Okay, I'll start with those people, that middle class that was really very opposition minded 6 years ago. In 2011, 2012, Putin's approval ratings were really low. He wasn't popular. Actually, the reason for all those protest rallies was the announcement that he was going to replace Medvedev. That was the reason for his dramatic change, and for the changing of the ideology and the team in Kremlin. That was the reason why Volodin replaced Surkov. That was the reason why he stopped thinking of trying to fascinate middle class and just started appealing to traditional values and to those people who were probably less educated or less Western oriented. What happened to the middle class, to the civil society that was very unhappy with Putin coming back? A lot of people started being disillusioned with political process, because all that political activity hasn't brought any success. Even more, all the examples. Every time when somebody tried to start successful political campaign, he ended up badly. The classic example was not even Alexei Navalny, but Evgeny Urlashov, the opposition leader who won the election of mayor of Yaroslavl, and who was imprisoned shortly after, and I think he's still in prison, and that's a tragedy. Navalny was very unlucky after being absolutely sure that that's his destiny to become the new president, the next president of Russia. From being a huge superstar in 2012, he almost lost it all until his recent comeback. But a lot of people who had real hopes that they can change the political climate, found out that so far they are not able to make any political changes, but at least they can make some social changes. So all that potential was turned into social sphere. We had after 2012 a lot of new volunteer organizations, charity foundations, a lot of new NGOs which are trying to solve the problem of orphans. That is actually an achievement, because after the infamous law that banned foreigners from adopting Russian children, the tremendous work have been done, and the situation is better than it used to be, because everyone understands that the state is not going to solve that problem, so the civil society should do that. Lyudmila Alexeyeva, for example, when I've heard her, I spoke to her many times, and I've heard her answering the same question: what has happened to Russian civil society? Why it's not protesting? She always says that you don't know what's happening in Russian regions. We have lots of human rights organizations in every single region of Russia. We could never expect that like 10 years ago. Everyone was absolutely indifferent. Everyone didn't not to care. Now it seems like the society is much more mature. Now people seem to feel responsibility for others. They are starting some volunteer organizations. They actually, charity has become a nationwide phenomenon. So it's a positive trend in a way, but it's at the same time it's obvious that that activity cannot be connected with anything political, because everyone knows that if you're going to run for any political office, you can be imprisoned. You can find some disgusting videos on YouTube about you or your family, or the prosecutors are going to come to your business and with unexpected inspections. A lot of problems are going to come if you are running, if you are political. So that's the reality where civil society is active, but within the boundaries.
So one final question, and then I'll open it up for questions and thoughts from the audience. Your book is dedicated to a very interesting, very famous Russian theater director, Kirill Serebrennikov, who's now under house arrest. And there's a parallel at the very end in the epilogue of the book where you talk about the rise of sort of conservative groups in the pre-revolutionary period that were targeting groups that they were uncomfortable with. And I'm sort of curious what lessons or importance we should attach to the case of someone like Kirill Serebrennikov today, who is being pressured for what is obviously a form of very modern, very sophisticated cultural work, which there are plenty of radical voices in nationalist Orthodox circles in Russia that they find completely distasteful and that they would like to see removed from center stage, literally center stage in Moscow. I'm just sort of curious, are we seeing the beginnings of very serious push to constrict where civil society is still very active, which is in the cultural sphere, or is this a kind of one-off random event?
I think that these are two different processes, and the case of Kirill Serebrennikov is very important because probably I'm exaggerating, but I'm afraid I'm not, because I must admit that Kirill is my friend, and I know him personally very well, and I was talking to him a lot right before his arrest, after all that case started. It seems to me that pressure, his arrest, could be compared to the case of Mikhail Khodorkovsky, in a way that 10 years ago, Khodorkovsky was like a sacred victim. He was known as the most famous, the most prominent, the most active business leader, and his punishment was not only part of Mr. Sechen's attempt to get his company, but also a showcase for all the big business. So everyone would know that there is an example. That's what can happen to anybody who is too politically bold and who's trying to challenge the regime. Just like Khodorkovsky, Serebrennikov is the most prominent cultural activist in the country. He's like the most revolutionary, politically sharp. Not in terms of political revolution, but in terms of artistic revolution. He's the best known theater director. He's the leader of the public opinion. He's the symbol of the new Russian culture. And when he's targeted, everyone feels that means that's a pressure against the whole artistic society. Every single artist, actor, writer feels that pressure, and the details of the process show that that's a very political process, and that's impossible to start that process without Putin's approval, because it's absolutely Kafkian. He is accused of stealing all the money and not preparing any shows, but although thousands of viewers attended those shows, and he had European awards for those shows that, according to the court, never took place. That's a paradox. At the same time, we've got that new phenomenon of that religious fundamentalist renaissance. It's rather new. Russia hasn't been a religious country for at least several decades. I would say almost a century. So that's rather new. I suppose that that movement is not that politically influential. If we're speaking about parliamentarian Natalia Poklonskaya, who symbolizes that strange movement of people who adore Nicholas II and are ready to destroy everything that it seems to them is disrespectful. That's still a marginal group, and their political influence is minimal. At the same time, probably there is something much more discreet but influential, like well-known Father Tikhon, who is supposed to be or who is rumored to be Putin's confessor. And according to well-known rumors, that was Father Tikhon who could be one of the initiators of Serebrenikov's trial, because of his film Student, that was very anti-clerical, and that, according to those rumors, offended Father Tikhon. So, cause many people in Russia are talking about what can happen after Putin is re-elected. is that radical fundamentalist group finally could become stronger if Russia can become Christian Iran or something like that. That's still something that seems too irrational. These are irrational fears, but they have some grounds, because it's hard to understand why these people are, if not getting support from the government, but still they are tolerated.
Okay, so let's open things up for questions, and I really do appreciate people complying with the ground rules of asking a question, and if you could just first identify yourselves and wait for the microphone, and we'll start up here in the sweater. Yeah, microphone's coming.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting. I think at the beginning
you
of
can just identify yourselves and pose a question.
Yeah, Larry Checo, Checo Communications. I found this all very interesting, and thank you. In the beginning, I think what you were trying to say is history is written by the victors, and so a lot of what went on prior to, underneath the bureaucracy was never written. 50 to 100 years from now, what will Russians know about the Putin era?
About what?
About the Putin era. About Putin now. Will he be eulogized, or will he be seen as a fall guy?
I'm very bad at predictions, and I forgot my crystal ball today. Sorry, but when I was writing my previous book, All the Kremlin's Men, my mantra that I kept on repeating when I was trying to convince different people in Kremlin or in Duma or big business leaders was that I'm writing the book for those who are going to read it in 100 years. That's not a book for us who know what's happening. That's a book for the people who are not watching the news, who are not following the political events for the last 15 years. And probably that is one of the reasons for that book's success in Russia. It's a huge bestseller, and like more than 200,000 copies have been sold. That's enough for Russian non-fiction market, because a lot of people they don't know what's really happening, and I suppose that at least that book, All the Kremlin's Men, would help some people to understand what was happening and why we had that tremendous U-turn in the first decades of the 21st century. And as we know, speaking about in 100 years, that's good news that all the diaries and records and correspondences are going to be revealed, and we were happy to, or unhappy to, read some emails of Mr. Surkov or some members of his administration. Definitely, we're going to read emails and faxes and text messages of Mr. Sechin and all of them in 100 years, and all of them are going to be published. And so I think that the Russians who are going to think about Putin in 100 years, they will have the proper information.
All the way in the back, please.
Dan Lieberman, I'm a writer. Yeah, I often wondered where Joseph Stalin got the power to gain power. He really didn't have any clique in the Politburo. He didn't seem to have any influence in the military. I don't think he had any special influence in the NKVD. Just how did he get the power to gain power and keep power?
Stalin? You probably know that Stalin was actually, the book is not about Stalin. He's mentioned there a couple of times, but actually that's a well-known story as well. Stalin was good at of using his enemies against his enemies. First, he started with using Zinoviev and Kamenev against Trotsky. Then he switched sides and started using Bukharin against Zinoviev and Kamenev. Then he changed his mind and destroyed Bukharin. He was very reactive. He was he all the time changed switched sides. He always changed the line. First, he announced that that's a time for an open, broad discussion. In a year, he announced that the situation is very difficult. We're under attack. So you are not participating in a broad discussion, but you are undermining the party line and you are threatening the country, and you're an enemy. So he was quick in breaking his own rules. And yeah, that's the short answer.
Right here.
Thank you for your remarks, Alexander Melgishvili, IHS Market. I have a question that is directly related to the way the Russian government now is choosing not to commemorate 1917 Bolshevik Revolution. And in particular, my question has to do with the series that were launched on the main Russian TV called Demon of Revolution. Now, it's a very interesting series, and the reason why I want to ask you this question is that in this series, which I'm sure you're familiar with, the claim is made about a German funding playing a crucial role in fomenting the Bolshevik Revolution of November 1917. I would like for you to weigh in on this issue. Thank you very much.
Actually, there are two TV shows now. First of them is called Demon of the Revolution. The second one is named Trotsky. So one of them is focused on Lenin. The second one is focused on Trotsky, and they are slightly different. The Trotsky series is slightly higher quality. Demon of the Revolution is not that. Is not received very well. That's not a surprise. You know, I saw, for example, although February Revolution was not commemorated at all, and the day when there was 100 years after Nicholas II abdicated, there was silence on Russian TV channels. But there was an online project created by РИА Новости, or Россия сегодня, state government-owned news agency, and that was really impressive online project that was proving that February Revolution was a color revolution sponsored by Britain. So that was clear that October Revolution is going to be shown as the color revolution sponsored by Germany, and there is a documentary on one of Russian TV channels that is like with documents and photos is proving that almost Lenin was a spy, and that's all was a conspiracy, and any revolution is an usually Western interference into Russian political process. I'm not surprised. That's the way how any instability is any opposition activity is portrayed by today's mainstream media. Any opposition is supported by the West. Any opposition is sponsored by the West, and so there should be no exceptions. So October and February were not an exception. So that's the part of the general line.
Maybe one more question if we could go right here. Yep. And then I should mention we're going to have a reception afterwards, so folks should stick around and talk to Mikhail.
Yes, my name is Jean McKenzie, and I'm a journalist. This is a little bit more to do with All the Kremlin's Men, in which you say that Putin is a good tactician but not a great strategist, and that if there is, if you have to choose between evil intent and chance or mistake as a motivation for the Kremlin's actions, you should always go to mistake. I'm wondering how you see the common view of Putin and the Kremlin here in the United States today, where we seem to make him the master strategist, and that everything that is being done with evil intent. Do you have a comment on that? Thank you.
Thank you for making this question the last question. I actually thought that was going to be the only topic we are going to discuss. So thank you. Yeah, I'm really impressed by everything I'm hearing in American media. For many years in Russia, we've been hearing that there is a huge conspiracy against Russia, and CIA and Pentagon and State Department are trying hard to ruin Russian state and to do anything just to destroy us. That narrative seemed to be rather successful in 2014. There was a huge wave of patriotism and isolationism and anti-Americanism, and now it's on decline. So now, if after 2014, that narrative became a bit ridiculous. A lot of people, not sophisticated Moscow journalists, but that became a common joke that probably we should blame Obama administration for the dirty streets and for the fact that somebody has broken a bulb. So it's that CIA behind every problem that exists in Russia is not that popular now. Period. To some extent, what's happening now in American media reminds me of that narrative I'm very familiar to, and I've been hearing to for many years. To my mind, Putin's role and Putin's genius is exaggerated, if I may say that. I think that he is idealized by American media when he's portrayed as the mastermind and the man who got a plan and who knew everything beforehand and who initiated it all. And I still think that that's a wrong perception. That Russian authorities are much more chaotic than they are described here, as probably CIA is or American establishment is usually described in Russia as vertical of power. Everything, every strategy that has been written by Alan Dulles is being fulfilled until today, and as they have general line to destroy Russia, they are doing that day by day and without any. That's not the way Russian authorities work. They are not so well organized. The people who work for Russian secret services are usually nicknamed as the people who send faxes, because there is no internet on Lubyanka, because it's unsafe and it's just they don't use it. They are not that technologically advanced as many American journalists think. So I believe that what happened was much more an opportunity than a plan. That was much more a result of a chaos. That I'm not here to tell you about the results of my investigation, because I didn't have a chance to make an investigation of what was happening last year. I was very preoccupied with 100 years old, but it seems to me that could have been a private initiative, an initiative of private IT company that wanted to make a present for President Putin, that knew that would have been popular, that would have been approved by him, but not the initiative from Kremlin or from Secret Service. That looks like bold coincidence than part of the strategy.
I think you need to take a closer look at some of the technical details, because the forensic information that's available publicly that connects the activities of state-sponsored cyber actors and how persistent they were in accessing emails and distributing information through state-controlled or non-state-controlled instruments online. All of that stuff is fairly straightforward. You can come up with an argument that the state is not fully centralized, and I have no problem believing that. But I would just be careful on the specific piece, which involves a level of technical expertise.
I'm not saying that
Yeah.
they weren't there. I'm not the one who says that was like somebody who did that absolutely independently. No, that's a complicated system. Everyone, in a way, is a lot of private companies have to be subcontractors of the government, and they have some interests, and some if they do delicate things, they have government money, so they are dependent. At the same time, that scandal is a new one, but domestically, the same methods have been used for more than a decade. We had such a history of DDoS attacks, of hacking, of online scandals in Russia. Like I remember attack against Estonia that happened in 2007, and that was not the first, because the domestic tests have been started well before that, and when I was working for Dost, we had like us or any other independent media, we had to spend a lot of time, a lot of money, just trying to think of how should we protect ourselves from those eternal attacks. We knew that if there is going to be a protest rally, probably one day before, where we were going to be attacked, and that's why we should create mirrors, a lot of different websites. So if one of them is not functioning, we use another servers. That we have been witnessing that system for many years.
Well, I wish we could have ended on a happier note, but we're delighted to have had you here. We wish you every success with the book, and it's really been a great privilege to have you. Thank you, Mikhail.
Thank you.
So please stick around. There's books for sale at a steep discount and a reception that'll start immediately afterwards. And hopefully you can get Mikhail to sign copies of the book.